Good evening. So it's Miss Leyna here. So I'm here to read part 6 of our story about Mary Driscoll. Thursday, July 8th, 1847, Lowell. Aunt Nora never received the letter telling her what ship I would be on. 'Twas only when she saw the notice in the Pilot, the one placed by Mr. Quinn, that she knew I was in America and sent Kate to get me. As soon as Kate arrived at Mr. Quinn's, she made it plain that she was wanting to leave, so I hurried along as best I could. Aunt Nora was unable to come herself. The journey would be too much for her bad leg. If only I had known 'twas Kate coming in her place, I would have found a way to get to Lowell on my own, to be sure. "'Tis glad I am to see my little sister after all, this time," Kate said. But she appeared to be no more glad about it than I. The stagecoach ride to Lowell was a rocky one. The two men who journeyed with us seemed to welcome Kate's chatter. My sister still talks without end, choosing to use 2 words when one would do. Her favorite subject is still herself. In that way, Kate has changed little in the past 2 years. But she looks and sounds like a different girl. She fixes her hair in a braided crown now and dresses with great care. She was wearing a fancy white dress. She speaks with a wee sing-song voice that sounds make-believe, like she were a fairy tale princess. Everyone was always fooled by that round, milk-white, innocent-looking face, even Ma. But not me. My sister has 2 faces. One she wears on the outside, and one she wears when she thinks no one is looking. I can see she has taken easily to the ways of this new world. 'Tisn't surprising. She went on and on about Mrs. Abbott. Mrs. Abbott and her children are visiting relatives in Philadelphia. Mr. Abbott is the agent for the Merrimack Mills. 'Tis thanks to him I will be working there. Kate said it was very kind of Mrs. Abbott to allow her to travel all the way to Boston to fetch me, like I were the hen for that night's supper. Proud she is that Mrs. Abbott favors her above the others. Mrs. Abbott considers Kate to be trustworthy, unlike other Irish, my sister said. When she first went to work for Mrs. Abbott, she was cleaning and discovered $1 under one of the beds. Kate had been warned that this was something Yankee women do. Mrs. Abbott had placed the $1 there on purpose, just to see if Kate would be tempted. That afternoon she gave her the $1, telling Mrs. Abbott that someone must have accidentally dropped it under the bed, and that she hoped Mrs. Abbott would be able to return it to its rightful owner. "Aren't you an angel?" Mrs. Abbott told Kate. Kate lectured me about all the things Mrs. Abbott has taught her, how to set the table, where to place the wine glasses. She had learned how to polish fruit properly and arrange flowers. Kate says Mrs. Abbott likes everything just so. I would think she does. There are times when Mrs. Abbott speaks to Kate like a friend. My sister is quite proud of this. Mrs. Abbott also employs 2 cooks and a lady from England who looks after the Abbott children. 'Twas dark when we arrived in Lowell. We went in the back door and up the stairs. Mrs. Abbott does not allow the servants to use the front door, and down the hall to Kate's room. Kate said that Aunt Nora picked a fine time to take to bed. 'Tis a great burden for her to take me to the mills in the morning, that much is plain. I don't know what to do. I would go myself, to be sure, but I don't know where they are or how to get there. We are going to see Mr. Fowler. He works for Mr. Abbott at the Overseer. I awoke at dawn. The early morning light was just beginning to come through the window. Not even a bird was awake. I was terribly confused. 'Twas like I was in a dream. I wanted to find a place to write because so much has happened. Slowly I left the bed, being sure not to disturb Kate, who was still asleep in the bed beside me. I opened the door and went into the hall. I stopped and listened, but heard no sound other than my own breathing. I found myself standing in front of the door that leads to Mrs. Abbott's bedchamber. Mrs. Abbott is away, I remembered Kate saying. No one would be in there. My curiosity was greater than my fear. I went in. The room is big. A wide white bed that has a white cloth stretched above it is in one corner. It looks like a heavenly carriage. Opposite the bed is a window framed by folds of blue shiny cloth. I parted the cloth and looked down on a beautiful garden enclosed by a white fence. This, I thought, must be what a garden in paradise looks like. This is what I pictured America to be. The walls of the room are covered with paper. Different pleasant scenes are shown. Animals in the forest, flowers in the field, and a picnic by the lake. Along one wall where the picnic is, I saw the most comfortable-looking ruby-red cushioned chair. I ran my hand over the cloth. 'Twas soft, like the fur of a baby animal. I sat down carefully and put my arms on the arms of the chair. I felt like a queen. I wondered what 'twould be like to live in this house. Across the room is a tall chest of drawers with an oval mirror framed in swirling dark wood on top. I went over to it. Lying on the top was a box made of different woods, some light, some dark. They were put together in a way that made a pattern. 'Twas an A for Abbott. The wood was smoother than any I had ever seen or touched. The box gleamed like still water reflecting the moonlight. What treasures, I wondered, would be kept in such a precious box? I hesitated, but I could not stop myself. I opened the box, not knowing what to expect. Will you look at that, I thought. Jewelry. Lying on the rose-colored cloth within were shiny rings, golden bracelets, strings of pearls, and red and green necklaces. Even in the weak light of the coming dawn, the contents of the glorious box shimmered, sparkly and golden. I gently pulled out a long silver necklace with square green stones dangling along its length. I put it around my neck and looked in the mirror. I saw my face for the first time in a long while. My, how thin I look. I touched my cheeks. There's barely any skin on my bones. What if these were my jewels, and 'twas I who was preparing to dress for the evening? Then I heard something. The floorboards above were creaking. Someone was up and about. I closed the box and held my breath. I stood frozen, unable to move. What if someone heard me? Or saw me come into the room? What would they do to me? Why had I come in here? I should have known better. Be still, a voice within me warned. I knew that if I were found out, there would be the devil to pay. Perhaps 'twas just someone stirring in the night. Perhaps 'twas my imagination. I had heard nothing since. I was afraid to leave the room, but I knew the longer I stayed, the worse 'twould be. The sky was growing lighter with every moment I delayed. I turned the doorknob slowly and pulled the door toward me. Thank the Lord, it made no sound. Being careful to close the door behind me, I tiptoed quietly and quickly down the hall and back to the room before anyone saw me. Kate, praise God, was still sleeping soundly. I crouched down by the window to get the light. I'm writing quickly, not knowing how long 'twill be before my sister awakes. Friday, July 9th, 1847, Lowell. Mrs. Abbott's house is so near the mills we were able to walk there. On the way, Kate reminded me to be polite and respectful. I told her I hoped I would be acceptable, which caused her to laugh. She said I should not concern myself with that. The Yankee girls are leaving faster than they are coming, she said. Mr. Abbott is eager to replace them with as many Irish girls as he can, because the Irish won't complain about things the way Yankee girls do. What things, I wondered, but spoke not a word. The bright red brick building is so tall, it seems to reach the sky. I never dreamed earthly hands could make anything that big. It looked to me like all the people in Ireland could fit inside. 'Twas like a fortress. There were smokestacks blowing their blackness heavenward and darkening the sky. I felt cold, although the day was warm. A shudder rippled through my body. There is nothing to be afraid of, I told myself. What could be worse than what I had already seen back in Ireland? I had to go through those gates. The guard led us to see Mr. Fowler. He is the oddest-looking man. Bald as a crow, he is. The sunlight from the window above fell on his hairless head, causing it to glow. Kate told him that I was Mary Driscoll, the girl Mr. Abbott mentioned. I think she was ashamed to say I was her sister. Mr. Fowler looked at me like that doctor did in Boston Harbor. I wonder, does everyone in America look at you this way? Could I write my name, he asked. I told him I could. He handed me a paper and showed me where to sign, which I did without reading what it said. I was too afraid. I start Monday in spinning room number 3. Kate left just as soon as she delivered me to Aunt Nora. Only Irish live in the acre, she said as we neared. 'Tis plain she doesn't like being in this part of Lowell. In such a rush she was that her heels nearly touched her head when she left. The acre is not far from the mills, but it might as well be on the other side of the ocean. The roads are narrow, twisting and muddy, not like the roads where Mrs. Abbott lives. The houses are crowded together, and goats, geese, chickens, and pigs roam everywhere. There are no houses such as Mrs. Abbott's in the acre. There must be 2 Lowells, one where Mrs. Abbott lives and one where Aunt Nora lives. Perhaps there are 2 Americas. 'Twas sad to see that Aunt Nora uses a cane because of her bad leg. Don't let it trouble you, child, she said when I asked her how she was feeling. First come and give us a hug. Hasn't it been ever so long a time? I've missed you terrible. Why, bless us and save us, quiet one. 'Tis a pure joy to behold your angelic face. How lovely you become. I've been as lonely as a church mouse these past 6 years, but now that you are here, I'll be lonely no more. Seeing Aunt Nora made me feel safe for the first time since I left home. I am glad my coming to America is a help and not a burden. I held back the tears from my eyes. Aunt Nora said that she knew it must be hard, but that we would care for each other. Just then the Delaneys came home. They are Aunt Nora's boarders. Mrs. Delaney is old. Her face wears 1,000 wrinkles, and her hair looks matted and dirty. Her son John looks like he wouldn't say boo to a goose. She's afflicted with the kind of complaint no one can understand, Aunt Nora said after they had gone into the other room. Mrs. Delaney helps Aunt Nora care for the 2 pigs. Once in a while she gives a good sweeping to the kitchen. Mr. Delaney disappeared 2 years ago, and she and John have been staying with Aunt Nora ever since. Mr. Delaney was the laziest rogue that ever wore clothes and was fed, Aunt Nora said. She thinks Mrs. Delaney is better off without him. Now he won't be pouring the family's money down his throat all day. But she was left with a heavy handful. It's her son John that Aunt Nora calls a heavy handful. The boy's a little daft, though not totally useless. 'Twas him that whitewashed the cottage, and all by himself, I might add. But he acts like something that fell off a tinker's cart and was never missed. John seems harmless just the same. He has found work north of here. He leaves in the morning. My aunt can be a harsh judge when she has a mind to. There are only 2 rooms. The Delaneys sleep on the floor in one, and Aunt Nora and me in the bed in the kitchen. Beside the bed there are 2 benches, a table, and a rocking chair near the fireplace. Aunt Nora is proud of the large stone fireplace at the end of the room. She said 'tis a great comfort come winter. Winters can be fierce, she says. There's only one tiny window to let light in. Aunt Nora urged me to go to bed. I told her I wanted to talk some more. I wanted to tell her about Aunt Alice O'Donnell. She said I could barely keep my head up, which was a fact, and that there would be plenty of time tomorrow. So I hope you guys have a great evening and join me again next week. Bye!